Bicycles have been around a long time, and some of the names in bicycle manufacturing have been around a very long time. Some with long and storied histories, some with shorter but technologically advanced biographies. But the major companies have a feeling about them. Names like Brompton, Schwinn, Specialized, Huffy and Raleigh conjure up something, be it the history of two-wheeled transportation with its feet firmly in the 19th century and the social mobility they provided to women, or maybe it's demi-vollering and the Tour de France, or perhaps it's a Ian Fletcher-like character arriving at the office and folding away their bicycle, cycle clips adorning their ankles. Or maybe they bring to mind the ultra-lightweight, superbly engineered street bicycles of today. But then there are upstart new companies, like, for example, Rad Power Bikes, an example of which we reviewed back here. We'll pop a link below. And those companies are slipping in to try and steal the crown from these older, more well-known companies as many people transition to buying e-bikes, building a name for themselves in a market that's new and shiny. And then, at the end of this list, there's those companies producing the direct-to-consumer e-bikes. Countless numbers of these companies have flooded the US and European market with bikes of variable quality and variable quality support. And one of these direct-to-consumer companies that's made a bit of a name for itself is Fiido. It has a couple of successful Kickstarter campaigns under its belt, and the Fiido D-11 is the product of one of those Kickstarter campaigns. I've had this bike on review for a couple of weeks now, so let's see how it functions in the real world. So getting on the bike, one of the first things that I really noticed is that the saddle is not super comfortable. It's kind of hard. I mean, I'm not gonna say I have a fat ass, but maybe I do. But either way, I'm used to something a bit softer and a bit more comfortable. Obviously that's something that you could change, although it doesn't look like it's a standard seat. So getting one that fits might be a little bit tricky. That's something you'd probably want to work with your cycle shop about, your local cycle shop, assuming they're happy to look at it. That's not a huge concern. So the second thing that strikes me is that 250 watts is fairly much adequate. It's not an enormous amount of power, to be sure, and at times I definitely feel like I could do with a bit more. I'm going to take the bike up to one of the steepest hills that I commonly cycle up, and we'll see how it does, but on the flat, I could just do with a little bit more power. Unfortunately, that isn't available. So long as I keep to around 20 kilometers an hour, 20-21, then the bike certainly has enough power to assist me when I need it, and certainly can keep me going without too much effort on my part, but does still leave me at the end of the trip feeling like I have put in some exercise. It doesn't, though, inspire me to go for great long rides. It's an urban commuter. It has little wheels, and it isn't hugely high geared, so I'm not going anywhere particularly fast, nor am I going anywhere, well, off-road particularly, no matter what the pretty pictures in the videos suggest. That said, it is absolutely fine for what it's intended to do, and at its price, it certainly seems to be pretty reasonable. The Cadence-based sensor isn't as sensitive as you might like, but it certainly does provide a little bit of a kick when you need it. I've also made a not inconsiderable amount of use of cruise control and the throttle. When my legs get tired, just pressing the go button and riding it like a moped is quite pleasant. It's not fast, but it's just nice to get a bit of a break. And as someone who, last time I sat on a bike, felt like I was going to die when I started cycling up hills, well, you know, it's useful. That cruise control kicks in if you hold the throttle down on its maximum position for about 8 seconds. After that, the bike will just keep going at that speed until you either brake or start pedaling. So let's talk about some of the other things that I've noticed having ridden it for a little bit. So this seat, this bike, on the website they suggest that you can ride this bike if you're about 5 foot tall up to 6 foot. I'm 5'6", and to get the seat into a position where I could ride the bike, it was pretty near the maximum insertion point. Now the little lugs that stop you pushing the seat post in further are actually lower down than that. And that has led to several people in the support forums managing to clip the bottom of the battery, because the bottom of the battery then protrudes from the bottom of the frame. And when that happens, you risk the bottom of the battery running into any objects that you go over. And that is not a fabulous piece of design, but a reminder, this bike is under $1,000 at the moment, so maybe asking for fabulous design is asking for a bit much. One of the other things that you'll notice is missing that you get on higher end bikes is folding pedals. This bike doesn't have folding pedals, and the locking mechanism, while it works pretty well, is fairly basic, and that has led to a couple of instances where I have managed to get myself in a bit of a pickle trying to put the bike into the car. When I would do that, sometimes I would find that I'd managed to tangle the pedals on the kickstand, and then there would be a little bit of fiddling around trying to resolve that. And at times that was a little bit difficult to resolve and led to some cursing.
Fiido launched their Kickstarter promising to create a high-quality folding urban commuter e-bike. The result of that, the D-11 is a 250-watt brushless rear motor equipped bike. 250 watts is the maximum allowed in much of Europe, but depending on where you are, in other countries for example, you may find that the D-11 is significantly lower power output than you can legally ride. That power comes from a 36 volt 11.6 amp hour battery, a battery that's integrated into the seat post along with a rear light. With that battery included, the bike increases from 13 kilos, which is pretty easy to handle, to a rather less svelte but still luggable 17.5 kilos, or nearly 40 pounds. It runs on 20-inch, that's 51 centimetre wheels, and has a claimed pedal-assisted range of around 62 miles. That's about 100 kilometres. That pedal assist maxes out at 25 kilometres an hour officially, but seems to cut off at 24 on testing. That's about 15 miles per hour. Again, that's to meet European laws. The display on this bike isn't super bright. It's bright enough that I can read it on a day like this in the cold, wet Pacific Northwest winter, but in the summer I can imagine it will get washed out pretty easily by bright sunlight. And let's be honest, it also has a very tricky relationship with the battery. So it will tell me the battery is full when I set off, and then if you hit a big hill, I suspect you're getting a lot of voltage sag, because it then tells you that it's half empty or even a quarter full before popping back up. And that's not great for confidence, particularly when you're new to riding it. On the road, that Shimano gear set shifts really well for a derailleur. I mean, like I said, I come from a world of internal hub gears, so derailleurs always feel a little bit clunky, but it shifts well. It's got 7 speeds, which is more than enough, I think, for city riding. Although, I may revisit that suggestion in a minute when I get to this hill. We'll see how that goes. But what I would like to see that is not there is either a chain guard or a belt-driven system. I've got oil on myself too many times just before cycling to work, and that is fairly tedious. Alright, here we go. Ooh, a bit vigorous. Might want to gear up for this. Let's try that. Alright, here we go. Yep, yep, yep. Need more power. Oh my god. Let's drop a gear. First gear. Let's see if I can make it up this hill. I can't even actually come down this hill on my BSA because it's too steep for the brakes. I actually can't even walk it down this hill without holding it because the brakes can't hold it. I will be astonished if I make it up here. Who says I'm not fair? I'll take you all on after I lie down. Ah. Oh my god. No, don't stop pedaling. Oh. Yeah. Whew. Sorry. Concentrating on breathing for a minute. I'll be back with you shortly. Going up that hill, the battery started saying a quarter. It's now back up to full, so I have no idea how full the battery is, which is one of the problems I've had. Alright, so the fun bit though is going back down, isn't it? That's always my favourite bit on a mountain bike. Here we go. But when we go downhill, the thing that I do notice is that the front brake, both brakes, are not very even. They're not very smooth. Again, this is one of those things that you miss out on when you don't buy a bike from a local shop, a good local shop, which is having it set up. Because honestly, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but the front brake is better because I spent quite a lot of time settling it, but the back brake I haven't really done very much with, and it's not, like, it is super not smooth. And that's something that you can fix. It's something that someone who's good at bike maintenance could probably sort very quickly. Or if you have a friendly local shop, they'll help you get that sorted out. But it's also something to be aware of if you're expecting to get this out of the box and start riding it. You need to spend a little time making sure those things are all working. That's not in the manual, and there's no setup guide. And honestly, as someone who is not familiar with bike disc brakes, I had to ask Winter to give me some advice on how you get those to be more smooth, because at the moment it can be quite grabby and it sticks a little. You know, I'm going to be a bit more generous. I think that derailleur actually shifts very well. But the one thing that this bike has given me is that it's been tempting to get the bike out and ride, which is funny because, like I say, I love riding my BSA. It is a really beautifully engineered bicycle, and it may be from the 30s, and my friends might laugh, and one of my friends is a very keen cyclist and is somewhat horrified by the fact that I still ride a bike from the 1930s. And it is true that more modern bikes are lighter and certainly better engineered. But the thing is, I don't ride very often anymore. I no longer have call to ride to my job. And when I rode to my job, and I rode every day, then that was one thing. But because I now only ride very occasionally, riding can be extremely tiring, and I end up hot and sweaty, and it's really not as much fun as it used to be. But riding this is easy. I can do this, and yeah, I'm tired when I get home. and I'm hungry. And I probably eat more calories than I burned on the ride. But I get a lot of pleasure out of it. Actually, one of the other things is this bike's made me quite lazy about changing down a gear. When I stop, sometimes I just don't even bother. I let it do the work when I start moving, which is a thing that I didn't expect like that. There we go. In 5th gear, let's just start in 5th. That's fine. Unfortunately, unlike some of the other models in Fiido's range, on the D-11, that top speed can't be unlocked. So that means in places where you have a higher maximum assist speed that's allowed, you'll get no assistance at all above that cutoff. That speed is incidentally displayed on the integrated dash controller, which also allows you to change between 3 levels of assist and gives you a battery capacity display. As you'd expect at this point in history, it has disc brakes front and rear. These are cable operated, with the cables partially routed through the frame, which is a nice touch, although they do run unhidden down the front of the handlebars, where they can on occasion get a bit tangled up when you're trying to fold and unfold the bike. And if you're interested in how it came and how setup went, check out our live stream unboxing here. We'll also link to that below. So the bike comes with a free bike lock. And this is a USB charged, Bluetooth enabled bike lock. It's all electronic. So my first experience with the bike lock wasn't great. I charged it a little bit before I set off. Out of the box it came with about 30% state of charge. The first interesting thing is that the download code for the associated app takes you to an APK. If you don't know what an APK is, it's a way of developers installing software, let's put it that way. So my first experience of the bike lock was that I charged the bike lock a little bit before I set out. Out of the box it came with about 20-something% charge. I topped it up to about 30%. I figured that would be enough for my first test ride, since I was just going to ride downtown and then lock the bike up for 20 minutes while I had a cup of coffee and then ride back. Turned out that wasn't the case, because when I got to the coffee shop, the bike lock unlocked, but then went into some weird state where it was unlocked, refused to connect to the app, and was just blinking at me. Eventually I gave up, cycled home, plugged it in, and it immediately woke up and started saying, yes, I can do things again. The rain has started, which means it's time to head home. Not just because I'm a wuss, because I totally am a wuss. It's under 10 degrees centigrade here. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, like 40, 50. And it's raining. And I'm wanting to be somewhere warm and dry. But the reason I'm heading home is not just because it's raining and I'm a wuss. It's also because this bike is IP54 rated. And IP54 is basically splash rating. It's not submersion, it's not very wet. So Fiido themselves say you should not ride this bike in heavy rain, you should not ford in it, that kind of thing. So for those considering this bike, I really heartily recommend that you put the mudguards on. Try and avoid that spray going up onto the controller, because when I was fitting the mudguards and I opened up that casing that has the controller in it, it was pretty obviously not very waterproof. There are some unshielded, unused cable ends, and the controller in there is fairly basically protected. So while I'm pretty sure this will last you for a good few years if you use it somewhere with only light rain, if you're someone like me who, back when I lived in Bristol, commuted every single day, come rain, snow, sleet, then this may not be the best choice for you.
Phew. Oh. So what do I think, having ridden it for a while and having a cup of tea in me as well, at least the starter one? Well, it's an interesting bike. It could be really good. And if it was fully wet weather rated, I would be much less hesitant. I would be pretty unreservedly positive about it. I live in the Pacific Northwest. It is wet here a lot. I mean, we alternate between fire bans and miserable grey days. And I like miserable grey days because I'm a miserable person, obviously. But not being able to ride it in heavy rain and having to have that kind of awareness, it's going to make me much more wary about taking it out. That really bugs me. I think that in many regards, the bike is really good. The build quality seems pretty solid. That aluminium frame is nicely put together. And while it could do with some finessing at this price, I don't think there's really a great deal to argue with. I mean, yes, the seat isn't great. And if you're under 5'5"-ish, I would definitely be very wary about whether you can adjust the seat and ride it without ending up smacking the battery against the ground. Though I will say that after my ride today, when I got home, I realised that the seat had slid down about 1.5 inches. I don't think I've tightened that seat bolt up quite enough. And it was actually riding on its end stops, which meant that the battery was covered in crud and very wet. And that does make me somewhat wary. But if you're using the bike to cut your carbon footprint by leaving the car at home just some of the time, and you're not going to ride it loads in the rain or the wet, then I can certainly see that for a sub $1,000 bike, it's pretty good. But having said that, do bear in mind if you are going to be locking the bike up, so if you cycle to, say, a railway station, or you're cycling to somewhere where you're locking the bike outside, you are probably going to have to carry that seat post with you, because on the D-11, the seat does not lock to the bike. The folding mechanism does work really well. It locks in place and it feels really solid once it does so. And once you've taken the battery out with the seat, then it's pretty easy to lift it into the car, fits in the back of the sole, fits in the back of the Nero without a problem. Lifting it with the battery in though, that's another matter. It is pretty heavy. It handles pretty reasonably. I mean, it's got small wheels, but for an urban commuter bike, it's perfectly acceptable. And the riding position is pretty comfortable. The battery, I've ridden maybe 40 miles on it, and I can't really speak to its longevity, but it seems to do enough that for most of my daily riding, I don't think it would be a problem. If you're going to be riding the 62 miles, 100-kilometer range that the bike has, then that might be more of a challenge. And I haven't range tested it, so I don't know how much range it really has. And like I said when I was riding it, that battery meter is pretty hopeless. I think the only time it's going to give you kind of a reasonable idea about how full the battery is when you are sat stationary and have been for a little bit. But it's not wet weather rated, and that really, I mean, it really bugs me. Outside of that, it seems a pretty well put together bike. And that is the most disappointing thing. Yes, it would be nice if the cables were fully integrated with the frame and they didn't flap around at the front where they can get caught when you're folding it up. Yes, it would be nice to have folding pedals, but you know, you can buy those, they're pretty cheap. But the lack of waterproofing is a real disappointment. I think that if you ride somewhere where rain is less of an issue than the Pacific Northwest, then that's something different. But if you're riding in the Pacific Northwest, I would be wary about this as your main bike if it's something that you need to use regardless of the weather. If you don't, if you're just using the bike for pleasure, or you're just using it to try and cut down your carbon footprint, so it's going to get you on the bike rather than driving a car, great. Really recommend it. Actually really enjoyed having it. But if it's going to be your daily commuter, I think you probably want to go a little step up and make sure that you have a bike that you can ride in all weathers.
That's it for today. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our other channel, Transport Evolve Take 2. We know that while a fair few of you are already subscribed, many more aren't. And remember, subscribing is free and so are notifications, and so hit them both and help us out. Let us know below what you thought of this video, and remember, play nice. If you're not fond of the YouTube comment section, then why not continue this on our Discord server? It's free and we'll leave the link below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons: Joseph Broucher, David Janakula, Andrew Martin, Guido Drahota, Brophy Wolf, Michael Goad, Tesla in the Gong, Sean Ueda, Gordon C., Regine Fellows, Anonymous Freak, Jim Burness, Kyle Hodgson, Anthony Coates, Ricky Leong, Brian Newton, Laura Sandborn, Rory Litwin, and Denny Hyde, and our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters: John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, Joe Bresney, Chris Asentova, J.P. Fagerback, Will Graylan, Matthew Drobnak, Christopher Lee Jones, Paul Conway, Ellery Hensley, and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of our wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. And of course, you can buy your very own TE swag over at the Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!